Perfect. Okay, everyone. So super excited. We have Robin Boyles with us today. Robin, I think we met several months ago. We actually met through Joe. We did networking together. So we were networked together. You and I are big believers of networking. Leslie, from my opinion, is an all-star networker, and AMC has grown exponentially because of her talents in that area. And we were in the supply chain space together. I think that's where originally the networking started, was a supply chain forum. Really interested in this conversation today because I think we've been able to connect not just on what we both do in terms of our consulting practices, but also it seems like we've had this synergy from experience. You've got such a plethora of experience. So I'm going to read our opening line because I thought it was just like great. So if I asked most executives right now, how much are your people costing you that you can't actually see on a P&L, which that's like an AMC situation, and then how much are your vendor contracts costing you that no one has looked at in years, which totally is the Schooley Mitchell framework, and we see that all the time. I bet most of them couldn't answer either question. That's exactly why I wanted to bring you in today, because we talk about these invisible
Yes.
costs all the time. So I wanted you to just take a second and introduce yourself. You've got such a phenomenal background. So please do take a minute to introduce yourself and Schooley Mitchell.
Yeah. So I'm Robin Bowles from Schooley Mitchell, currently living in the Phoenix, Arizona area where it's probably going to be 106 today. Been at Schooley Mitchell, I think going on 5 years. And quite honestly, what attracted me to Schooley coming out of my corporate career, was labor relations and human resources, was the opportunity to help businesses reduce their costs with very little lift from them. Because in my corporate days, I 100% remember working for large companies that loved high price consultants that would come in, disrupt the business for 3, 4 months, take over a conference room, have study, focus groups and questionnaires and all of this stuff to end up giving us a 3-ring binder of stuff that we knew 4 months ago. And I
Right.
love the idea that we approach this differently and that we're doing the actual work, not just telling a company you need to do X, we're actually doing the work for them. And I think people will often say, it seems like a strange transition. And I'll say, honestly, I think it comes from being the person many times in the company who had to do the layoff notifications. So the person who had to sit in the conference room and wait for Joe to come in and sit down with my little blue folder and slide it across the table and say, Joe, we did not meet our fourth quarter revenue goals, and unfortunately, your position's been eliminated. And then watch someone that I probably knew from a social perspective cry, think about how he was going to go home and tell his family that he got laid off. When in my mind, we had the money. We didn't try very hard to save money. We didn't try very hard to find money. And let's be honest, from a financial management perspective, laying people off is the quickest, easiest way to balance your
Yeah.
financial life. And so I think when I found an opportunity to help companies not do that, that's what really resonated with me.
Oh, I actually didn't even know that part of your story, and I can feel it when we're working with clients who are so focused on like you just said, that quick fix of going into their people side of the business and really cutting from the people side of the business, which that's your tribal knowledge, that's your institutional knowledge, that's your trust, that's the capabilities and capacity of your teams. And why are we not internally focusing on the optimization of where the processes, the systems, or the contracts could be lacking? There's a book that Leslie, I think you put me onto it. Do you remember The Good Jobs?
Hmm.
Yeah, this is Xenia Ton, I think her name was. So she's an Emma. I'm probably butchering that, so we'll put that into our notes when we have this go out. But it's called The Good Job Strategy, and it's a book that she writes about internal investments in people as part of your optimization strategy, because she looks at how exactly, like literally, you just laid out exactly what she looks at, where executives go to the human capital and start cutting the human capital without actually understanding where the costs are draining or leaking or insufficient in other areas. they go straight to the people side of it. So I thought that was really interesting that you just said that, and I'll put everyone onto that book because it's an incredible book, and it just basically goes through everything you just said, like you read it. Perfect. Okay, so what I want to talk about really right now is what is happening inside organizations. And Leslie, we can have you kind of chime in here because you've been with a couple of manufacturing organizations. We've been with several, small, mid-scale, even to enterprise level organizations. So I'm going to ask this to both of you. When you walk into an organization for the first time, what do you usually see that leadership does not see? Robin, I'll have you go first. Leslie looks deep in thought.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of, do they see it, or are they, is it present and they see it but choose to ignore it, or is there like, is it actual like blind? Like, I think there's maybe two different areas to say, like, that leadership sees things, but are they enacting on that, or is it literally a blind spot? I think there's two different.
Like they don't want to see it. It could be right in front of
Yeah.
them. You put the business
Yeah.
case there. They just don't want to see it.
And
Okay.
that's maybe the ignorance of that, like they just don't see that. But then there's some things where they just don't even realize it.
Right.
So it's
But
not
we have
necessarily
those.
ignorance. It's more just.
Yeah. We can dive into those stories. Robin, what about you?
I see two things because I get, whether it's good or bad, I actually enjoy it. I get to work sometimes with frontline employees because, I can get the financial data, say, from the accounting department, but really understanding how a process works in an organization, I have to go to the person who's actually accountable for it. And when I'm meeting with a lot of these employees, I can pick up on two things: how process oriented an organization is, which honestly is very, very little in my experience. And then also kind of what the culture is. I have a couple of clients right now that are almost the opposite ends of the scale. I had a client where the culture, people were excited for me to come in. Nobody felt threatened. They knew the purpose was to find money to help them keep growing, and they were all bought into that mission. So every exchange I had with them, they were super helpful and engaged and, trying to make this as best an outcome for the organization as possible. On the other hand, you have an organization where I was just chatting with some of their managers today, where you have a real lack of responsibility and lack of accountability, where I say, who handles X? And I get shipped around to 5 different employees because no one really knows who's handling X. And there's a lack of follow through in that if I ask a question, they'll just be like, I don't know, instead of them, as part of their job, taking an extra step to say, oh, I called the vendor, here's that account number. And so it's kind of two ends of the spectrum. And I tend to see from the frontline employees, I can pick up on exactly what the culture looks like. And are you process oriented? Is your organization structured and defined well enough? And diffusion of responsibility is, to me, just a huge red flag.
Well, I know that's absolutely something that we've seen multiple times. Leslie, I'm thinking of a few clients that we worked with where you get the spin around 100%. But what we find is, and in a couple of places we've gone into when we're looking from the org dev lens, when we're going into that and the people side, it's do they even know what their job or their lane is? And so we've gone into a couple of places where like 30-40% of individuals from frontline all the way through to executives, they don't have job descriptions. So you say to this person here, hey, you're in charge of training and development. And they're like, am I? Am I?
Right.
So then that just gets diffused. 5 years later, no one's looking into training and development because it wasn't in their lane, wasn't in their wheelhouse, and no one defined that for them. So I think, Leslie, that could be something that we see a lot is where leaders don't like they've hired the people, the titles are there, and they assume the work is getting done. But when you really dig into it, the role from that person, the role doesn't actually have a definition around it, or the role isn't really holistically integrated into the organization, and people are just not doing the work and diffusing the responsibility.
Yeah, I think one thing, there's two things. So for me, what I really see is the gap between individual contributors and people leaders. So really, who's contributing and, what their take is on it, right? So if you're looking at maybe performance management or, training and development, people leaders might be getting it, but then, and saying, yeah, like we're doing it and we're getting it, but then the individual contributors necessarily not. And there's a gap. And one of the areas that we look at is we measure the cost of that gap between the people leaders and individual contributors, and can equate a cost to that gap in terms of things you wouldn't see on the P&L. And I think another area that we really see is that, and Rob and I would imagine this really affects like what you do, is the lack of decision architects that are around an organization in terms of frameworks where there's really no level of autonomy in who get and how decisions are made. So there's no frameworks of, well, how does that decision get made? Purchasing it. If you look at Robin, what you do is around a lot of contracts purchasing. Sometimes it's because like that person's had a relationship with that supplier and it's that there. And, you don't even have, if we look at our construction site backgrounds, you don't even have people like on the front lines doing the work, don't necessarily have an decision-making abilities on what they're procuring, because it's got to go through all of these different other decision gates like that. So I think those are two things where there's no decision making processes, and then there's such a gap between people leaders and individual contributors. I think I would imagine, Robin, you see that all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes that leaves a huge gap. I literally had a conversation in a client, and I had pulled some data and discovered that a vendor that they have had for a decade, no contracts, just worked with them for a decade, had recently just thrown in like a 12% increase, just threw it in. And so I first went to the person who's in charge of it from an operational standpoint and said, did you know that you just got this 12% increase? And he said, no, I don't see any of the invoices. That's accounting's job. So I went to accounting and said, did you know this? No, I don't do any of the ordering. That's operations job. Nobody was watching these invoices go up year after year after year. Nobody knew. They were big pieces of data that just fell through the cracks because there wasn't that ownership, and there wasn't, to your point, clear role definition. And I think sometimes we think we have clear role definition until people really dig deep, and all of a sudden you discover a huge hole.
Yeah, and that's that invisible cost that we keep talking about. Like that isn't showing up anywhere, right? Like these additional increases aren't showing up anywhere on these quarterly budget reviews, so that you have the data as the executive team to say, whoa. Last quarter you said it was costing us this much. Now it's all of a sudden 12% higher. Who is going to look into this? What are you bringing to the next meeting? What do we want you to bring to the next meeting so we can make an educated decision as a group to say what we want to do next, right? Like that's like, and to me, that's best management practices. Like we regularly at AMC check everything from subscriptions, like it's like death by 1,000 subscriptions right now. Subscriptions. We on average check the different costs of implementation partners. We check costs with and all of our providers. We're constantly double checking quotes across. We get quotes across multiple providers, but we do this on a regular basis, and we're a small firm. We can control that right now. So I can see where a service like yours, who can do it on scale, en masse, would be, amazing for someone to look at all of their contracts in one go, right?
Yeah. And I wanted to add something to that too. And sorry, Robin, if I cut you off, but one thing as well is, not necessarily like, I think, Robin, your organization really comes in and looks from a cost perspective. And I think that's one aspect of it as well. But, if you look into, manufacturing, or Agnes, where we kind of specialize, that AEC industry, construction, we're looking at big P3 contracts, we're looking at these kind of things. Not only should you be watching from a cost perspective, but you have to also be watching from a due diligence perspective that your suppliers, anybody that's a part of that supply chain, also has like adequate insurances. Are they even registered businesses? Are they doing the due diligence that you need to have from your supply chain to make sure that you actually are adhering to your contract requirements, right? Because that's part of is manning your supply chain or your subcontractors. One area we run into it a lot, where we see with construction organizations, this core certification that was a big part of getting into projects. You had to have the certified of, a certification of recognition. And that was great. The contractor would get that, but any subcontractor that they had, they didn't have to have it. So it was one of those things where we were regulating our subcontractors, but the sub of the sub of the sub, which is something we see as a lot too, that can end up costing you a lot of money indirectly as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think you see it, in this organization, and one of them that I referred to that's growing very fast, the same kind of simple processes and the same type of jack of all trades people are great when you're getting started, right? They'll do anything for you. They'll work long out, right? Then you get to a certain level of size and sophistication, and that lack of process and that lack of expertise now just hits you in the face. Like, hey, Joe was a great guy in the warehouse, but now I need a skill set up here to run the warehouse. Maybe Joe's not the right person anymore. Oh, and by the way, we have no processes for Joe to follow. So there's kind of a growth pattern, I think, and I see organizations in that while we're growing, and we didn't take our systems along with us. We didn't create systems for the organization we are now.
Yeah, because the system will always change, or should change and evolve as the scale of the organization grows and evolves, because it's no longer the same organization. The culture is going to change with more people. The influence is going to change with more people. Innovation is going to change with more people. There's so many different areas that it's going to change, yet you can't have the same structure that moves alongside it, right? Yeah. There's a really great question here, and I want to ask you, when you start your analysis within organizations, what surprises most business owners that you bring forward? Is there something that's usually like a common, like, yeah, they didn't think that was coming?
I would say a common theme is literally just how much they're spending at different places. It's like, and I don't expect that. People at a C level should not necessarily know every vendor by name and whatever. But when we show them, and I think part of it, the reason is there's kind of a translation process you have to go through. So if you've seen a parcel shipping invoice or a merchant services invoice, they're confusing. Like, we have people that I call like the translators. Like, I send them something and they translate that into English. So a lot of times when we're showing it to C-level people, they're seeing it in English for the first time. They're seeing all these costs put out in a very simple little chart, and they're going, whoa, wait, what? We spend how much on that? What? Or how many vendors do we have for that? Why do we have so many vendors? So it's just things like that they shouldn't be in those weeds, but they're always surprised by what we're pulling out of the weeds. There's that translation that nobody's paying attention to.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think that's like, to your point, at the C-suite level, you might not know every single vendor, but like, generally speaking, some of the bigger spend packages, how do we not have eyes or knowledge on that, right? Leslie, for you, kind of similar question. When we're completing our analysis, which is the profit leak analysis, we've run several pilots now. I know we've surprised some of our clients. What would you say forward facing is the biggest surprise for them when they get that report of like, hey, you're losing X amount of dollars a year to whatever, again, you're not calculating on your P&L statement?
Yeah, I think for us, for what the biggest surprise or the biggest area is, I think that same analogy or the same statistic that actually more children die in a swimming pool with more people around than a pool with less people around. And
Oh,
that is because people assume that people have eyes on it. So when you're pulling all this information, the first and I think we see a lot of frustration that comes out. And I don't think we don't necessarily take it to personally. I'm sure, Robin, you're the same way. Like, I'm not the person, and we preface that at the beginning too, as well. Like, we're going to give you probably some uncomfortable information. But I think the biggest surprise or the biggest, aha moment is that, like, we thought we had eyes on this. Like, we thought we had people. We thought that there was that. So again, like, is there scope alignment? Is there leadership alignment? Is there strategy alignment?
is
Do we just,
competency there?
yeah,
Much to Robin's
yeah,
point, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Are we competent in making decisions? How are people making decisions around that? Like, do we have clear clear decision-making points. Again, back to what does that look like? So I think for us, it's, 100% is every time is I thought there was eyes on that. For instance, we've come across, again, a performance management where, we've had people that have said, I've been here for 6 years and I've never had a performance management. And the people leaders are going, well, it's done every year. Well, no, it's done every year from that level. And that filter that's reporting up is saying that it's getting done. And then, but it's actually not. So I think that is probably the eyes on the things that are, how have we not had eyes on this for so long?
That kind of brings me to this next conversation, and we've said it a couple of times already, like making things visible that are currently invisible. And so Schooley, Mitchell, Robin, what you guys do is you take these contracts, you're analyzing them, you're looking at them from so many different perspectives, so many different angles, everything. I'm assuming, business size, geography, best fit contractors, rates, like all of these different. But again, these costs showing up on P&L statements. They're showing up as an expense, but they're not showing up in comparison to like what they could be. And we're on the same side in the sense of like, we know our people could be better. That's why we're brought in. We're brought in because there's this gut feeling from a people leader or from an organizational leader who's like, something's wrong. Something is amiss. Something is afoot. So let's come in here and let's do this audit. So I kind of want to have this conversation about best practices and what does it look like to make things that are invisible visible and giving that clarity. So Robin, I'm going to go to you. Like, what are your thoughts in general? And this is a little more abstract, but I'm very fascinated with this. What are your thoughts around the practices in which organizations should be taking to some degree to make these things visible and put them onto the forefront of their business planning?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the clients I've been mentioning did something about 6 months ago that I thought to myself, how simplistic, but how lovely at the same time. They basically took their AP and sorted it and just went by the top vendors, decreasing, and sat with the entire management team and looked at each one. What are we doing with that? What are we doing with that? And they'd ask, I knew it because they'd asked me for some data as to which areas we were looking at. And I thought, that is so incredibly simple, but how incredibly impactful, because now you are bringing exactly what you said. You're bringing visibility. You're saying to the supply chain guy, do you have a handle on this? I see this amount. What are you doing with this vendor? So I think that's great. I wish more organizations did that. I also think, and back in my corporate days, this was a big push. I don't think I ever worked for a company who actually got there, but doing zero-based budgeting. Because let's be honest, budgeting in most organizations is you get whatever you got last year plus 3%. Well, if it was already inefficient, now I've added another 3% of cost onto something that was already inefficient. Yes, is zero-based budgeting a horrible, painful process? 100%. But I think this idea of just we're over or under budget without a little bit more explanation or a little bit more exploration, I think that's where people get themselves in trouble. And that's where the money just flows out the door in every way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this is something where Leslie and I are talking about doing, health checks, right? Doing an annual health check with your organization, much to your point. We could just continue to add to that bottom line and assume the cost and eat it, or we can start looking at what that would look like from, again, getting the data, getting the information, targeting it. So Leslie, from your perspective, invisible to visible, we're running these organizational health checks. What are your thoughts in terms of like this is a best practice for executives?
I think making sure that it's clearly outlined in each leader's role or department head's role of like what level of accountability they bring to that, right? So I think really outlining and understanding like what is the information that they need to bring, what is required to be bringing to those kind of things. Because I think sometimes I don't necessarily think it's a negligence on doing it. I think it's more
malicious. I
don't ever really see that. It's really just more about how do we do it? How does the data get presented? And then I think the education, really, I think that's really the education around that. We're not doing enough training and development. If we look at the gap in terms of like leadership of new generation or legacy generation to incoming generation. We're really missing financial literacy on terms of like understanding P&Ls, like what does this mean? And I think also outlining in roles is about how does that P&L affect that department, right? So, and what does that department contribute to the P&L, right? So if you're in manufacturing, we've worked with a recent steel manufacturer, and one of the areas that they were actually losing a lot of money was like in shift handovers. And it's so trivial. It's so crazy. It came down to the night shift and the day shift were not communicating. There was no SOP on how it was getting handed over. There was no SOP on the night shift of what happened there. So it really just came down to like management of like understanding what is my role, how does it impact, how do I impact the P&L, and not just from like if you're in a manufacturing and you're looking at a line, the line of like, yeah, the product is getting out. Well, that's not necessarily like adding to the P&L. It's really, do we have proper shift handovers? Do everybody know like their roles? Can everybody on the line do each other's roles? So really that transfer of knowledge as well. So I think really leaders understanding what do they bring to the P&L, how do they contribute to it, how does their department contribute to that P&L, and what are they responsible for? And then I think also around creating not necessarily policies, because we don't need any more policies and procedures, but like that annual housekeeping of how often are we checking in with our vendors? Are we looking at like if we look at
them?
yeah,
Are
and
we
are we
rating
like
them?
yeah, if we look at if we were we talk about CN or CPKC annually, they go in with all of their suppliers, all of their contractors, and they review all of their numbers. How much on time delivery did we have? What does their ESG strategy look like? How have they improved their performance with like their people? What are they doing in terms of all of their supplier diversity? So I think like it's the due diligence of organizations to really have like what does that procurement checkup look like with your vendors?
Yeah. And I think it really,
Absolutely.
yeah, and Robin, I think you can speak to this too. One of the things that I find is like let's make the invisible visible is instead of continually optimizing externally, that is always the conversation that goes first, right? Hey, like we need to increase our revenue, we need to increase profits, all of these but it's always an external conversation. So let's get business development going, let's get marketing going, let's like do events for our clients. It's always external, external, external with an expenditure attached to that
Yes.
versus, hey, what about repairing the house? Leslie and I say this all the time, protect the house. So look at
Right.
the house and what can we do with the house to repair it, to fortify it, to build it, to create processes internally where we're optimizing the house so we can lean into more money in business development, more money in marketing expenditures, etc. So I don't know if that resonates with you, but for us, it's like protect the house.
100%. I mean, if you just go even and looked out on LinkedIn or any other social media site, they're 99% about increasing revenue, right? Here's the new marketing technology that's going to change everything, and here's a new sales process, and here's a new this and a new that, and it's bombarding people with this top line grow, 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 and there's not enough focus, if any, put on like, yeah, protect the house. Are you efficient? Have you optimized everything you can optimize? There just isn't enough focus on that. And when you look at, I hear from organization after organization, oh, we tried that marketing thing. We tried SEO. We tried this. We tried that. And I think to myself, why didn't you look internally first before you spent all that money on something that didn't work out? And, I have a friend who always says revenue hides a multitude of sins. And when times are good, people don't pay
I
attention
like
to
that a
stuff.
lot.
When revenue starts to go down, now all of a sudden it's sort of like, oh, wow, we did not understand how screwed up things were.
Yeah, yeah, and like, why do we decide that that's the time that we're gonna look internally, right? When, like, again, the house is on fire now, and while you're dealing with the fire, you're all of a sudden gonna be doing this audit process. I'm just starting with a client right now, and we did a team kickoff. This is a little off tangent, but I think it's relative. We're doing this like engineering firm, so very much engineers. And they're very skeptical of this process. It's like human capabilities, looking inside the house. They are in a very good spot. So culturally speaking, very aligned, very capable, very competent individuals. So the question was raised is like, hey, but we're doing good. Why do we need to look into organizational development? And I'm like, oh, this is perfect. And I said, well, what would you rather? And Leslie says this all the time, and we say this all the time, is pick your heart. Your heart
Yeah.
could be, we need to invest in our internal people processes while the house is burning. That could be
Yeah.
really, really hard to do. Or we're going to, while we're in a good place, we're in a place of operational, to some degree, efficiency. We're going to now investigate and lean into, which can be hard and challenging in its own right. We're going to lean into optimizing our systems, the efficiencies of our systems, the capability of our people, the competencies of our people. We're going to lean into that because the house isn't burning. Both are hard.
Yep.
Both are true.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
which position would you rather do that from? And it was so funny because when I framed this to the engineers, they're like, "Oh, we get it. Oh, thank you, thank you."
Right. Yeah.
So that was.
I mean, that's what like I love about my client in they're in Florida is that they did that. They're growing like crazy, and yet they were able to recognize, wow, we have to make a lot of investments. We need, new technology. We need to hire more this and more that. Like they saw it coming, and were able to say, we need to fund that stuff. How are we going to do that? And that's one of the reasons they brought me in. So it's a totally different vibe than you go into an organization that just lost their biggest client and now they're scrambling to make up a $20 million deficit.
Yeah. Well, and that actually brings me to the anchor stat reality check that I had here, which I thought was wild because we have our own little stat that we have. But Schooley Mitchell clients save an average of 26 to 28% on reviewed expenses across categories, which include your telecom, your merchant services, your shipping, and waste. Can you tell us about this? Because you do this. Like, how on average is this? What are we looking at?
Yeah, it's, the amazing stat is when you think about if we can achieve 26 to 28% savings and keep organizations with their same vendors 80% of the time. So I tell people, think about that in terms of numbers. If we can keep all of these people with the same vendors, yet still average 26 to 28% savings, what does it tell you about how much your current vendors might be overcharging you? Like those numbers are, yeah.
That's not comfortable, right? Like, did they get one over on us? That's not a comfortable feeling.
Absolutely. And, I see it sometimes too, where, I'll be working with, say, a middle manager and they'll say like, oh, this vendor's been so good to us. And I'm hesitant to change because they've been so good to us. And it always just like, kind of gets my attention because not that you don't want to have good vendor relations, but when someone's saying it so strongly, it just makes me wonder, like, are you, are you looking for the most efficient solution or the easiest solution for you? Or, and I'm sure you guys experienced this, I did in my corporate life, people who had relationships with large vendors always got taken out to lunch, always went to concerts and sporting events. And so those kind of relationships always perk my ears up like, all right, I need to dig deep on this one because it feels fishy to me.
And again, is that protecting the house or an individual, right? They're benefiting from it, this one singular person, or maybe their department's benefiting, but it's that additional expenditure to the organization that they could be saving. So is that person, is their best interest now for the organization or for themselves or their department? And we come across that quite a bit where people protect, it's to us, it's an ego response. Especially when we're looking at people through the capacity of like competencies, abilities, capacity, like when we're targeting departments and individuals, they obviously, and I would say, yes, they get defensive, but it flares up this section of them where they're like, hey, I've been making decisions for me or my department, and I've siloed myself out from the rest of the organization, where now they're actually impacting other teams, um, usually in a negative connotation. I've rarely seen a positive correlation where someone siloed a department or themselves. Like I've rarely seen that. But I'm impacting other teams, which means I'm impacting the house, which means we're now taking away from the holistic picture of how these departments should interact, process, workflows, decision rights, to Leslie's points, right? So we're seeing that on that end. we have our own stat here, which is we do assessments and audits, much like yourself. We have one that's a wonderful team assessment. And this one specifically gets hooked up to payroll. So we can actually do the assessments and understand the numbers that are coming through the assessments and how that's turning out to individual payroll. So ours is 15 to 20% of payroll is usually lost in just misalignment.
Wow.
Unclear communication, unclear lanes, unclear job description. I mean, Leslie, you've done multiple of these assessments now. Where are you seeing the profit leaking within the team dynamics?
I think like we've just really lost people asking questions or asking why. I think we've just like we've really got comfortable. Everything and everyone have really got comfortable with just status quo.
Yeah.
And I think that's something too where it's like, well, like why? Like why does that look like that? Or if even if something feels uncomfortable, like, well, why? Why to do that? So I think that's kind of where we see that misalignment of that. And I just think it's lack of communication, siloed communication, that difference we talk about between people contributors or people leaders and individual contributors, that gap where we say it's always a dirty filter. So usually at the top, and Robin, I'm sure you can resonate with this, usually at the top, like it's rare that we come across like pardon my French, like pieces of shit. Like it's really rare that like they're garbage at top. And then it's really rare that they're garbage at top and garbage at the bottom. Usually they're really great at the top, really great at the bottom. But where we get a little bit of fuzz is like the middle level of like we call it the dirty filter, where that's the information that like that cross section, it's going from top up and top down. And usually if there's misalignment there or really they don't understand their roles or they don't understand how they make decisions or if there's like not enough communication or collaboration, the information that kind of comes up is really filtered like a broken telephone up there, right? So it's like, well, my procurement department says, like my manager says, like that's the best deal that we can get. Well, like again, like is that the best deal that we can get? And have we asked the question as to like what are they doing for us in that area? And I think sometimes, I'm sure Robin, you agree as well with this, is that sometimes there is a certain amount of people that we can procure from because like there's a spec. So like there is like you are leveled to, if you see in government contracts, RFPs, like there's a spec of a product that we have to use. And there's certain suppliers that have a monopoly on maybe certain products and we have to buy from them. But that doesn't limit us from like having conversations to have smarter procurement, to look at what that looks like. If we can only sole source from them, like they say, well, that's the price and that's what it is. Well, like, is it like, what does that look like to do those kind of things? And I think also going by that might be the spec or the procurement, but I think also like with your contracts is posing the question of like what are the other alternatives, right? So yeah, that's a spec and we can see that, but this sometimes something will meet a spec, and I think it's like just posing the question to say this checks all the boxes, we can get through that, is that's going to be there. But again, it's also making sure that our people can advocate for that too, right? And how do we educate
Culture
them
of
and how do
ability
we
to act. Yeah.
we translate that, we empower people to do that, right? We don't just say like this is who you got to buy from. And I think it comes from top down.
Yeah, and that's part of the job that I think is fun too, the optimization part that we do, which is not just let's change vendors. It's wow, the way you've been doing that, really, you're spending way more money than you need to. There's a much, much more efficient and less expensive way to do that. And you see it in little things like duplication of things. Like there's a lot of CRMs and different systems now that have built-in telecom. Why pay for a separate telecom system if you don't need one? Or why are you having waste done this many times a week with these really small bins? Why not get one big bin and have them come twice a week instead of 5 times a week? It's things like that where we can go and optimize someone's process or how they approach something even before we even talk about vendors and contracts. And I always find that part fascinating, quite honestly.
Well, let's move into that because I know we've only got a couple of more minutes here, and I want to get into the process of Schooley Mitchell. Like everyone knows us, AMC. This is really a showcase for you guys. We see the complementary work. The way that we work with one another is we don't eat off of each other's plates, but we've both taken a peek underneath that rug to say, hey, something's happening here. This isn't my field of interest. We always say this, we're gonna raise the flag. We're going to bring in
Yeah.
Robin. She's going to be auditing this particular situation. And you just talked about technology and CRMs. We have those people as well, which are also referral partners to us, where we say, hey, we've got a CRM. It's being utilized at what we figured is about 10%, yet they're paying 100% of the top tier platform. So somebody needs to go in there and optimize that platform and hook it up to the rest of the systems, which is something this whole technology conversation, and we don't have to get into that now, but tech stacks technology, I think, is very complicated for business leaders who aren't in the tech space necessarily. And you're probably seeing a lot of those costs and pulling those utilization reports where we do that as well. High level, definitely not as much as you, where we go in and we're like, did you know you're paying for these softwares and these platforms and these technologies, of which none of them speak together? So now you're taking information off platform just to upload it to a different department, which if you don't do that clean, it's death by 1,000 data misses, right? Like it's always going to be a decimal point here and there. It's never going to be a big hard crash that happens. And I mean, Leslie and I've come across this pretty much with every organization we've been to, where technology is not being utilized to its fullest extent, but they're paying for it, or they're using multiple technologies of which they have crossover in terms of what they actually provide. So much to your point. So I'd love for you to walk us through, like, what does Schooley Mitchell do? What is the no risk model, and what are business owners getting wrong about their expenses? I know it's a big blanket, but go off. I'm going to pull that record.
For me, I try to do the work with a theme of not disrupting the organization, because again, having been in those shoes, saying to someone, hey, we're going to have this consultant come in, used to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Like, I'd be like, oh my God, here we go. So making sure that I always come in with that vision of, I've been there. I'm not trying to add to your plate. I can do most of the work myself. I just need your help in getting started. So, that the biggest part of what I do is data gathering. So it's going from which vendors provide X, and then digging down into, okay, let me get the invoices, let me see the contract, give me to a subject matter expert, let me figure out how you really do this. And then I kind of package that all up and send that to our analysts in Toronto. And they're the ones, I jokingly say, do the real work. They're the ones who take that and create a baseline so that we can show organizations that translation service. Here's what you're actually paying. And then they also start negotiating with different vendors or finding ways to optimize costs, both together, bringing back options to the client. So my job is really kind of the data gathering. And I try not to laugh when we're showing people the reports and they have oh my God, what? Like they just have no idea. And then they certainly have no idea that they can save that much money. But I like that. I like that I have the opportunity to do that and say, hey, here's how much money we're going to save you. I like it even more when I already know kind of how they're going to spend that.
Yeah.
Not that I wouldn't want to help an organization, but if there was an organization that really needed help and I found out it was going to go to like bigger management bonuses, I probably wouldn't feel as good about that. But if it's sort of like, hey, we're going to take this money and we're going to invest in this, that, and this, or we've got this $1.2 million hole and I need to fill it so I don't have to lay anyone off, those would be ideals. That to me is like a full circle moment, like from being the person in the room who did the layoff notices to being the person who helped prevent layoff notices.
How true. Yeah. You got to the other side of it. Can you explain to us a little bit about the no risk model? Because I thought that was really interesting, because you guys, like, we have our own processes and we do kind of like an audit, much to your point, and then we pause and then we go into retained work, because I think for us it's like, hey, we need you to understand the problem before we go in and start kind of the disruption of it. But you have this very interesting no risk model. I think you should explain it, because I think that can help individuals who are not currently auditing their internal contracts and vendors it's like well, it's a no risk model. So it's a no risk way to step into this and understand what you're looking at.
Yeah. So I start quite honestly with getting the lagging 12 months AP report, because I want to make sure with a prospect that we're very clear and on the same page about here's the different costs we're going to look at. So I take care of that. We have an agreement about here's the vendors we're going to look at. They sign the service agreement. They still haven't paid me anything. There's no retainer. There's nothing up front, all the way through to we're presenting you now with our value reports, which is what we kind of call our results. The company is the one making that selection. We're going to give them 2 or 3 options with it's already negotiated. So it's already down to the penny. They see to the penny how much they're going to save with each option. So we go through option A, we'll do the same thing, same frequency, same everything. You're going to save this much per month, this much per year. Option B has this little bit of a different tweak. This is how much you're going to save. They make that selection, and then we manage the implementation, because there's a lot with, if you say something like waste, right? Those are long contracts, 3 to 5 years. So you've got to go in and we let the client know, hey, your contract with this waste vendor, you need to terminate the auto renew. We'll actually write the letter for them, have them sign it. They send it certified mail. Great, we've done that. Okay, now we're going to transition to this vendor. So we need to know that crossover, because you can't go without a waste disposal for, weeks on end. So when is this going to be ready? When are you going to be ready for the new one? We organize all that with the new and old vendors, just make sure everything goes smoothly. And we do that with everything that we implement. Now, there'll be a point at which all that implementation is done, and we're kind of like go live Monday. Boom, go live Monday happens. Great. Now we start the clock ticking. 90 days after that, they would get their first invoice from me for half of that savings. So they haven't paid for 3 months. So they're really only taking money to pay me out of savings they would not have otherwise had during those 90 days. And that continues for, excuse me, 36 months. And during that time, we are reviewing all of their invoices, looking for errors. We're also always looking for better opportunities. So as a contract, so let's say in 2 years, the contract is up, we're automatically going to start that process again of looking for the next contract and going back out to the market. And then we're always a fail safe for service issues. Hey, I can't get the vendor to answer this, or I don't know how to do that. They can always come to us and we can take care of it for them.
So you manage that. You become like their external consultant on that side to manage that entire system or ecosystem that may not have someone accountable or responsible for it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Leslie.
Yeah, I just had a question maybe for Robin, because I think it might be relevant for anybody that's like wanting to consider this. But some of the areas where I could assume that there would be a lot of expenses, like let's say around like insurances, fleets, and we're looking at, insurances. How does Schooley Mitchell really, I would say it's about probably a delicate balance when we look at, these relationships. So there's legacy in here where maybe we have like new generation coming in, we have old generation coming in, and maybe you could be able to speak to some of the new generation that says like, hey, like I know that I'm not getting the best insurance rate from our insurer on our fleet. However, like my dad has been friends with this insurance brokerage forever, and we have everything insured with them, and like it's going to cause a disruption to our business, with like changing over the fleet. Like what do we do? Like, so how does Schooley Mitchell like navigate some of those challenging relationships? Because a lot of procurement, a lot of deals that are done, they're done. It's a relationship business. Sales is like that. So, there's probably hesitation around, we have such a good relationship with them, and, like, how do you guys navigate that and make sure that, they want to say like, hey, we want to stay with the same insurance brokerage, but we know we're not getting the best deal. Like, so how do you guys navigate those kind of like, I would say delicate balances of relationships with firms coming in?
We, in a couple different ways. First of all, I have to be very specific up front. Like I need to know exactly how something works so I can separate reality from just the feelings, the emotions from the facts.
So transparency is important at the beginning.
Like what part of your affinity for this vendor is factually about what they deliver you and this and that, and what's just a comfort zone for you? Are there
Okay.
specific things they do for you that are out of the norm that I couldn't get from a contract that you'd want me to know about? You know, they'll make a midnight delivery or they'll do this special thing for us. Those are all important things for me to know. So there's that. But I often tell, particularly managers will feel like they're put in a bad spot. The CEO signed our service agreement. We're doing this. And the manager will say to me, man, this vendor's been good to us and they are going to be mad. And I say, look, you don't have to be the bad guy. That's part of what we do is we're the bad guy. We're going to be the ones on the phone with them, talking to them. If they give you a hard time, you just say, I didn't, that my CEO is doing this. I can't necessarily stop this project. This is what's happening. But we also really take a lot of care to try to keep that vendor. So we're getting a new quote from an incumbent. We're getting quotes from other vendors. We'll take the extra step and go back to that incumbent vendor and say, look at Leslie, if you want to keep this business, you need to sharpen your pencil a little bit because we have other opportunities for this company to save money. We'd love for them to stay with you, but you need to be in the ballpark. And I think that's how we're able to get that 80% is that we give the incumbent an opportunity to come back around and go, do I want to lose this business or, can I cut a little bit more and keep it?
Yeah, I think that's so clever. Thank you, Leslie, for that question because their business and sales is a relationship, right? So when we go and do business development, we're building a relationship with individuals, we're educating them, we have their best interest in mind. We're looking at, yes, obviously how we can position ourselves in our different products or services, etc. But it's always with like, hey, we want to build a long-term relationship. But in 5, 6 years, 10 years, 20 years, where we're talking about legacies, if there's a new change in leadership, if there's a new change of conditions, but we've always been increasing our rates to a certain degree, it's like at some point someone should be looking at us and saying, hey, is the relationship worth, what did you say earlier? Is it worth the squeeze, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? So, and sometimes it is. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. So I'm very grateful that you do that because to be able to salvage those relationships and keep them, but still help the organization with the cost reduction, that's powerful, right? Because some of these relationships are so intertwined. But I agreed with you. Like if no one's looking at the rates, like I'm gonna have my extra 12% or 10% that no one's looked at, right? No one's negotiated. I'm not gonna negotiate myself down. Yeah.
Right. And we try to honestly get if it is a new vendor, kick off that relationship on the right foot with a 3-party call. Ourselves, the client, the new vendor. Hey, everybody meet each other because we'll now know both parties very well. We want them to know each other very well. And so if there's something special, we'll try to tell the new vendor, look, this is going to be your point person. This is kind of their role. And we want that first call to go great. And so we try to prepare for that and have that be a seamless transition if at all possible.
Of course. No, I think that's super important. I just want to close this off. I think you guys have, for Schooley Mitchell, I asked you earlier, a risk-free expense analysis. Can you explain that to individuals? And then we'll take the link and we'll make sure it's included in the videos wherever they're posted. Can you just explain what people are going to get with that?
Our entire process is a risk-free assessment. For me up front, I do the AP report because I would never ask someone to sign a contract without some certainty and detail around what I would be looking at because I'm kind of peeking under the curtain and I want them to be very clear about this is what I'm peeking at. So all of that process all the way through, no cost. So at the end of the day, if we bring, and this has happened usually with much smaller organizations, we'll bring back some savings. But we know that the implementation of that savings is going to be hard for them because they're, don't have enough manpower, they don't have great technology, whatever the reason. And so we'll say, like, if we get it if you don't do this. Guess what? They owe us nothing. We went through that entire process. They kind of know where they stand. We may revisit it in a year or two, but we walk away and go, okay, no, it makes sense. And they don't owe us anything for the effort we put into that.
Do you get that often? Like in my mind, if they're seeing that they can save, I'm going to throw out a number, $1 million on all these vendors and contracts, would they not then move forward, knowing that for 36 months, at least they'll be getting to some degree, $500,000 back per year?
It's usually, like I say, it's usually much smaller organizations, or it can be if the implementation is some type of technology. We see that more in the merchant services area.
Okay.
So everyone has their payment processing attached to something. And so sometimes we will see, wow, that changeover to create that connection, they just don't want to do it sometimes. We can make it connect to almost anything. It's, are they comfortable? And I have a brand new client and their finance people are like, oh, integration, oh, change, But once they see that we'll manage that for them, I hope that they will kind of come around to this is a good thing. But it'll all come down to that final report where the CFO is going to look and say, hey team, for this amount of savings, get on board. We're making a change. But it's really usually smaller organizations or a tech issue.
Yeah, well, I can see the tech issue, and that's like I said, that's a whole other segment, a whole other conversation that we can have. Leslie, any final thoughts, any last thoughts here to close this off?
Yeah, I think just one other question I probably would say that we would probably maybe run into, but it would be, is there a way that Schooley Mitchell can work in, let's say a department? So if they were to, rather than coming in and like, this sounds like a great idea, but it could cause a lot of disruption. Would love to be able to figure out how to just work in like an area just to see, like, let's just dip our toes in. Agnes and I come across that where we'll work with a small team and then we'll prove value in that small team. Is that an option for individuals that say, hey, like we know something in like this department could be, what it say, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, chances are it's a cow. And then so is there areas where Schooley Mitchell can just, if we had people that were listening that really just said like, hey, I'd like to just try this in like an area of my business.
Pilot, yeah.
Yeah, is that something, like what and how receptive are you to pilots? Because I think that's something that people just want to see proof in the pudding, and like how can this could be too good to be true. So we want to just look at that. Is that something that you guys would offer?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons we go through the AP report to have agreement up front. And I have a prospect right now who's like, I want to do this, but can we pick one cost area? So his team is going to come back and say, this is the area we want to pilot. And we'll go ahead and do the entire process for that area. Hopefully they have an incredible experience. We find great savings. They love working with me. They love working with the team. And then move on to other things. I think for really large organizations, and this is a really large one, that makes some sense because not only see how we work, you kind of want to see the capability of your organization to kind of get me the data and to interact with us, and how is that going to go, and how much change management am I going to have to do with my own internal resources. So yeah, I actually love that approach because with big companies, I'd be taking it one at a time anyway. So I like pick one that you're comfortable with. Let's just ride that out and see how it goes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Well, guys, thank you so much. This was incredible. Robin will put your resources in there and your contact information. This was excellent. I'm just loving the conversation about, again, like going back to the very beginning, making things that are just kind of unknown to us or invisible to us visible, and making that part of your best management practices, because there is cost hidden within the house, within the organization. And I think if I can leave anyone who's watching this video with a thought process, it's like, hey, yes, go look for more business revenue, throw all that money into marketing and sales, but there is resources out there. There are solutions out there where you can actually take that lens, turn it inwards, which is really uncomfortable sometimes because you're going to have to admit, hey, we let these contracts slip. Hey, we let these vendors take advantage of us. Hey, we have incompetent people in incredibly competent positions, right? Like there are things like that happening, but it's okay to take that lens and move it internally and look internally, because at that you're saving the money, where otherwise what you're going to have to do, Robin, like you said at the very beginning, is the number one step people take when they can't find that money is they start cutting their teams. And now you're cutting into your human capital, which is your business, your reputation, your brand, your legacy knowledge. It's all of that stuff there. So thank you so much for sharing this with us. I very much value and appreciate your time, and we've always had such great conversations. And I look forward to more panels and more fireside chats like this. So thank you. And thank you, Leslie, as always, for your insights.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin.
Yeah,
Perfect.
thank you guys for your opportunity.
Thanks so much.
Perfect. Okay, stop recording.